"You're not family anymore." Those words from my own son cut deeper than the surgeon's knife that removed my breast cancer 3 years ago. There I stood, on the porch of the house I helped pay for, holding a dish of warm apple pie in my trembling hands, as the front door slammed shut with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of my heart. It was the 4th of July, Independence Day, and ironically, the day I was declared independent, or better, excluded, from my own family. The smell of barbecues drifting through the neighborhood clashed with the bitter taste of tears I swallowed. 67 years old, and I never imagined my Michael, my firstborn, the same baby I cradled so many nights, would look at me with those eyes. His father's eyes, eyes that once loved me, now brimming with contempt. "Mrs. Thompson, are you all right?" a delivery man from the house next door asked, seeing me standing frozen like a statue, clutching a pie that no one would eat. I didn't answer. How could I explain that I'd just been banned from my own family's celebration? How could I say that my hands had made that pie with extra cinnamon, just how Michael liked it since he was 7, and now it was growing cold along with my heart? I turned away and walked to my silver Toyota Camry, the same one I'd been driving for 12 years. I placed the pie on the passenger seat, almost like it was a person, a companion, something that wouldn't reject me. "Ellie, you're pathetic," I muttered to myself as I started the car. The radio started playing Sweet Caroline, and I slapped it off. Neil Diamond was the song playing when I met Harold, my late husband. Not today. Today, silence would be my only soundtrack. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Boston, passing happy families carrying coolers and folding chairs toward the Charles River to watch the fireworks. American flags waved on nearly every house. Freedom, celebration, family. Everything I no longer had. What Michael didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been planning this visit for months, not just to bring a pie, not just to try for reconciliation. I had an envelope in the glove compartment, an envelope with results that changed everything. I parked near Boston Common and finally let the tears fall. Not the polite tears of a society woman, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for lost time, for mistakes made, for words left unsaid. But most of all, I cried for what Michael would never know now. My phone rang. Sarah, my daughter. She probably already knew what had happened. She and her brother were always close, even in their differences. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Mom," her voice sounded worried. "Michael just called me. What happened?" "Nothing that hasn't happened before, dear," I answered, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "Just your brother exercising his right to independence. He said you showed up without calling and started questioning Diane about the kids' education. Is that true?" I closed my eyes. Of course that's how he'd tell it. Of course Diane, my daughter-in-law, would turn my simple question about Tommy's grades into some territorial invasion. "Sarah, I just asked if Tommy was doing better in math. You know that." "Mom," she interrupted, "you promised you wouldn't do that. After last time, you promised to give them space. Last time." She meant last Christmas, when I suggested that maybe, just maybe, letting Amber, my 12-year-old granddaughter, wear so much makeup wasn't appropriate. Apparently, questioning any parental decision was an unforgivable crime. "I just brought a pie, Sarah, an apple pie for the 4th of July. Silence on the other end. Then a sigh. "You can't just show up without calling, Mom. Not after everything. Everything." As if years of small clashes, built-up resentments, and unspoken hurts could be summed up in one word to explain the chasm that now separated me from my son. Before I go on, don't forget to join our group, where you'll have access to exclusive, ad-free stories right on your phone, even without internet. Just check the first pinned comment. "All right, Sarah," I finally said. "Tell your brother I'm sorry." And I hesitated, my hand instinctively reaching for the envelope in the glove box, "and that I understand his decision. Are you going to be okay? Do you want me to come by after the fireworks?" "No need, sweetheart. I'm heading home. I have things to take care of." I hung up before my voice could fail again. I looked at the apple pie on the seat beside me. Still warm, still filling the car with the scent of cinnamon and walnuts. A pie for a family that didn't want me anymore. That's when I made my decision. A decision that would change everything. That would shake the foundations of the family that had rejected me. Not an act of revenge, but of liberation. I started the car again. This time, I had a destination. Attorney Peterson's office was just 15 minutes away. It was a holiday, but he'd given me his personal number years ago when he handled Harold's will. "Leonard, this is Eleanor Thompson. I need to see you today. It's about the will." Yes, I know it's a holiday, but I glanced at the pie beside me. "Let's just say I've just gained my own independence, and I need to make sure it's permanent." As I drove, I watched the preparations for the city's fireworks in the distance. That night, while Boston's sky exploded in color, I would explode in my own way, quietly, decisively, irreversibly. Michael thought he knew me, thought he could toss me aside like old furniture that no longer matched the decor. But he was about to learn a fundamental truth about his mother. At 67, Eleanor Thompson was just starting her revolution. What I did after that door closed wouldn't just shock my son, it would shock everyone. Leonard Peterson's office was empty that holiday, except for him. A man in his 70s, gray hair perfectly combed to the side, still wearing a suit even on the 4th of July. Old-school lawyers are like that. Formality is their armor. "Eleanor," he said, adjusting his glasses as he watched me walk in. "When you called, I admit I was worried. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" I placed the apple pie on his mahogany desk. The smell of cinnamon filled the austere office. "I brought you dinner," I said, trying to smile. "I figured you'd be here alone." Leonard raised an eyebrow. We'd known each other for 30 years. He knew I wasn't there just to share dessert. "Is it Harold's will you want to revisit?" "It's been 5 years, Eleanor. I thought everything was settled." I opened my purse and pulled out an envelope. Not the blue envelope from the glove compartment that held my own sentence. This one was white, official, stamped with the Massachusetts General Hospital logo. "It's not Harold's will I want to change, Leonard. It's mine." I handed him the envelope. I watched his brows furrow as he read the results, the diagnosis, the prognosis. His eyes lifted to meet mine, now full of compassion. 6 to 8 months, I said, with a calm that surprised me. "That's what I have left, and I want every minute to count." Leonard set the papers on the desk, took off his glasses, and carefully wiped them with a silk handkerchief he pulled from his jacket pocket. A ritual to buy time, to process. "Treatment?" he finally asked. "There are options. Palliative chemo, maybe a few extra weeks, reduced quality of life." I shook my head. "No, thank you." "Do your children know?" My silence was answer enough. "Eleanor, Michael told me today I'm not family anymore," I interrupted, feeling anger rise again. He closed the door in my face, literally. "Family conflicts happen, especially on holidays," Leonard said, taking a fork from his drawer and trying a bite of the pie. Extraordinary as always. But Eleanor, you can't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Boston was preparing to celebrate. Families, freedom, independence. These aren't temporary emotions, Leonard. Michael and I, this has been building for years. Small wounds that never healed, words we can't take back. I turned to face him. "Do you know what he said to me right before closing the door? 'I'll never forgive you for what you did to Dad.'" Leonard stopped, fork in midair. "What did he mean by that?" I took the blue envelope from the glove compartment that I'd brought with me. It was sealed, never opened. Harold died believing Michael was his biological son. The fork clattered onto the desk with a sharp sound that seemed to echo through the whole office. Leonard stared at me, speechless. "But you were married for 40 years. 42, I corrected. "And we were engaged when I got pregnant. But Michael isn't Harold's son." Saying those words aloud for the first time in 42 years felt like having a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. A secret kept for so long it had become part of me. "Eleanor, I never told anyone. Not Harold, especially not Harold." I sat down again, exhausted. He never questioned. Michael was premature, born 7 months after the wedding. A big, healthy baby for a premature, but no one dared comment. Leonard shook his head, incredulous. "And the biological father?" "Robert Callahan, my first love. He came back to Boston for a summer before I married Harold. One last meeting, one last night. Does he know?" "He died 15 years ago. Cancer, too. He never knew." Leonard sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "And you want to tell Michael now? After all these years? On your deathbed?" "I don't know, Leonard. I don't know if I want him to know. Part of me thinks he deserves the truth. Part of me, my voice faltered. Part of me fears it would just confirm that he's right to push me out of his life. So what do you want? I straightened my back, took a deep breath. I want to change my will. I want to sell my house. I want to spend the months I have left truly living, Leonard. Really living. No lies, no pretending, no more being the Eleanor everyone expects me to be. And your assets? Michael will get enough for his children's education. The rest goes to Sarah and to a cancer research foundation. I paused. And I want you to be the guardian of this. I handed Leonard the blue envelope. What's in here? The truth. All of it. Letters to Michael, to Sarah, to my grandchildren, and... I hesitated. Michael's original birth certificate, before I had it changed. Leonard took the envelope with care, as if it might explode. You want me to give this to them when I'm gone, yes, unless I decide to tell them before. The lawyer nodded slowly, placing the envelope in his briefcase. And now? What will you do now, Eleanor? I looked out the window again. The sun was starting to set. Soon the fireworks would begin. Now? I'm going to watch the fireworks. Alone. Like an independent woman on Independence Day. I smiled with more confidence than I actually felt. And tomorrow, I'll start living the rest of my life. Leonard stood and went to a bookcase, pulling out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. I shouldn't drink with my medication, I commented. 1 sip won't kill you, he replied, pouring a glass for each of us. Then, realizing what he'd said, he froze. Eleanor, I didn't mean... I started laughing. A real freeing laugh. Soon Leonard joined in, and we laughed together like 2 old friends laughing at the biggest joke the universe has to offer, mortality. We raised our glasses. To life, Leonard proposed. To truth, I replied. We drank. The whiskey burned my throat, a reminder that I was still alive, very much alive. 2 hours later, I parked my car atop a hill overlooking the Charles River. The crowd gathered below, families sprawled on blankets across the grass, children running with sparklers, couples holding each other close. I grabbed my phone and sent a message to Sarah. I'm okay. Don't worry. Love you. I have news to share. Lunch tomorrow? Her yes came almost instantly. The first boom of fireworks filled the sky. Explosions of red, white, and blue reflected on the waters of the Charles. So American, so traditional, so familiar. I thought about the blue envelope now safe with Leonard. I thought about the months I had left. I thought about Michael, about his last words to me. You're not family anymore. What he didn't know, what no one knew, is that family is more than blood. It's more than DNA. It's more than a paternity test buried for 40 years. Family is choice. Harold chose to love Michael, even suspecting he might not be his biological son. He never questioned, never doubted. And now, I would make my own choice. The fireworks lit up the sky, brighter and brighter. Bursts of stars and stripes, waterfalls of light, explosions of color challenging the darkness, just as I would challenge the destiny given to me. 6 to 8 months isn't much time, but it would be enough to rewrite my story, to shake the foundations of the life I built, to reveal truths, and maybe find forgiveness. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Sarah said you're watching the fireworks alone. You shouldn't be driving at night. We'll talk another day. Not a word of apology. No hint at reconciliation. Just pragmatic, distant concern. I typed my response with steady fingers. Don't worry about me, Michael. I'm starting a new life. And believe me, what I do next will surprise all of you. I sent the message and turned off my phone. The fireworks kept bursting over Boston's sky, and inside my chest, something else was bursting too. Determination. Eleanor Thompson wouldn't die as a bitter old woman rejected by her son. No, Eleanor Thompson would be reborn before she left, and no one at all, was ready for what was coming next. The house at 347 Maple Street had been my home for 42 years. Every inch of that place held a story. The little notch in the kitchen door frame, where we marked the children's heights. The creaky stair-step that always announced when Harold was coming home late from the clinic. The corner of the living room where my reading chair had sat since 1985, facing the window that framed the big oak tree in the yard. Are you sure about this, Mom? Sarah asked, watching the realtor hammer the "for sale" sign into the front lawn. It was a July morning, just 3 days after the 4th of July incident. The air was heavy, promising a summer storm. Absolutely, I replied, signing the last document the man handed me. I want a quick sale, Mr. Collins. I don't mind lowering the price a bit to speed things up. Sarah looked at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. My pragmatic, always in control daughter couldn't hide her shock. But where will you go? What will you do with all this? She gestured toward the house full of furniture, pictures, keepsakes from an entire lifetime. The realtor, sensing the tension, mumbled something about coming back later and slipped out discreetly. Come, I called to Sarah, walking toward the kitchen. Let's have some tea. While the kettle boiled, I watched my daughter. Sarah had always been the sensible one in the family. Like me, a university professor, her brown hair always pulled into a messy bun, glasses with discreet frames. She'd been married to Alan for 15 years. No kids by choice. Michael, on the other hand, had always been impulsive, temperamental, so much so that now he was a successful chef with his own restaurant, turning emotions into award-winning dishes. You're sick, aren't you? Sarah asked abruptly, her eyes fixed on mine. The kettle whistled, saving me for a moment. I poured the Earl Grey into the same porcelain cups we'd used since she was a child. Why do you think that? I asked, avoiding her gaze. Mom, she said, her voice almost a whisper, you called me yesterday at 6 in the morning to ask where I kept those photos from our trip to California in 1992. You sold your old piano to a music store without even haggling. And now you're selling the house where you've lived basically your entire adult life. She squeezed my hand on the table. I'm a psychology professor, remember? I recognize putting affairs in order behavior. I looked at our reflection in the kitchen window. Mother and daughter, 30 years apart, united by the same gray-green eyes. I could have lied. I could have made up some story about wanting a change, about being tired of Boston. But Sarah had always had a radar for my lies. Yes, I finally answered. I'm sick. Her fingers tightened around mine. How bad? Terminal. Metastatic cancer. Started in the ovary. Now it's in my liver and lungs. The words came out clinical, distant, as if I were talking about someone else. 6 to 8 months, according to the doctors. Sarah didn't cry right away, as I'd expected. Instead, her eyes narrowed. How long have you known? 3 weeks. And you didn't tell us? Not even me? Not Michael? I tried to tell Michael on the 4th of July, I said, feeling the bitterness rise again. I had the results with me. I was waiting for the right moment. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. That explains everything, she murmured. That's why you showed up unannounced. That's why you insisted so much. Oh my God. She stopped and stared at me. He doesn't know, does he? No. I'm calling him right now. No! My voice came out louder than I intended. No, Sarah. He made it very clear he doesn't want me in his life. That was before. This changes everything. It doesn't change anything, I replied firmly. I'm the same person. I have the same flaws, the same faults that irritate him so much. Being terminal doesn't suddenly make me easier to love. Sarah finally let the tears fall. But you're our mother, she sobbed. You're our mother, for God's sake. I stood up and hugged her. My strong daughter, always so controlled, shook in my arms like when she was 8 and woke from a nightmare. Listen, I said softly, pulling back to look into her eyes. I don't want my last months to be about pain, hospitals, and pity. I don't want forced visits or guilt-driven reconciliations. I want to live, Sarah. Really live. What does that mean? I smiled. A real smile. The first in days. It means I sold the piano because I never actually liked playing. Harold convinced me to take lessons when we got married because a refined woman should play piano. It means I'm selling this house because it holds more ghosts than happy memories now. It means I want to see the sunrise in Maine and the sunset in Florida. I want to eat fresh lobster and dance under the stars. I want to do all the things I never did because I was too busy being the perfect wife, the perfect mom, the perfect professor. You're having a midlife crisis at 67, Sarah said, almost smiling through her tears. I'm having an end-of-life crisis, I corrected, and it's wonderful. That afternoon, as we sorted what to keep, what to donate, and what I'd take with me, I told Sarah about my plans. I would buy a small trailer, one comfortable enough for a single person, and head down the East Coast. I'd already reserved a spot at a campground in Portland, Maine, for the next week. You, in a trailer? Sarah laughed as we packed up the crystal to be stored. The same woman who complained about a 4-star hotel in Chicago because the shower made a weird noise? People change, I replied, tossing aside a set of embroidered tablecloths I'd never used. Or rather, circumstances force us to change. And your treatment? Doctors? Medicine? I'll take whatever is needed for comfort. But I've already decided, Sarah. No aggressive chemo for a few miserable extra weeks. I want quality, not quantity. She nodded, understanding. My daughter always understood. And what about Michael? She finally asked when we were exhausted, sitting among half-packed boxes in what had once been our living room. What about him? Will you tell him? About your illness? About your trailer adventure? I hesitated. Michael, my temperamental son, my firstborn. The boy whose eyes were shaped just like Robert's, whose smile was all Eleanor, but whose temper was unlike anyone in the family, at least anyone he knew about. I don't know, Sarah. I don't know if I want my last months to be tainted by more doors slammed in my face. He has a right to know. He has a right to reject me too. I closed my eyes, tired. Let's do this. Don't tell him for now. Let me leave. Start my journey. Maybe when I'm in, I don't know, Cape Cod? Maybe then I'll call him myself. Or maybe you can test the waters, see if he'd even be willing to talk to me. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Always the family peacemaker. While she took some boxes to her car, I went upstairs one last time. There, in my nightstand drawer, I kept an old photo album I hadn't shown anyone in decades. I opened to the page I knew so well. There he was, Robert Callahan. Dark hair, crooked smile, deep eyes, a cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth. Classic 70s style. The last picture we ever took together, before he left for California and I stayed behind, accepting Harold's proposal. Sensible, reliable Harold. 6 weeks after that photo, I found out I was pregnant, and the rest, as they say, is history. I closed the album and put it in my bag. This was a truth I still wasn't sure I'd share. I didn't know if Michael deserved to know, or if it would only cause more pain when I was no longer here to explain, to ask forgiveness. I heard Sarah calling from downstairs. Time to lock up the house, at least for now. The realtor had said that, in today's market, the house could sell in weeks, maybe days. Before leaving, I stopped by the room that had been Michael's until he was 18. Sarah and I had boxed up most of what he'd left behind. High school baseball trophies, some college books, an old video game. But I'd left one thing, the little dinosaur pillow he loved as a child. I picked it up and inhaled its scent. Decades had passed, but I could still catch the apple shampoo he used, mixed with the smell of dirt from his days playing in the yard. I set the pillow back on the bed and closed the door. Some memories don't need to be packed. Some go with us wherever we go. At the end of that afternoon, when Sarah left with a car full of boxes she'd keep for me, or more realistically, would inherit soon, I sat alone on the front porch. The for sale sign swayed gently in the breeze. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Sarah just left here. She was acting weird. Is something going on with you I should know about? I stared at the message for a long time. No concern, no affection. Just a direct question, almost an accusation. I typed, I'm selling the house and going on a trip. It's time for changes, Michael. He replied almost instantly. You're selling our house? Dad's house? Without even telling the family? Our house. Dad's house. Not my house, even though I was the one who cared for it for decades, kept every window clean, every floor waxed, every garden blooming. No, to Michael, I was just the caretaker of a property he considered more his than mine. It's already decided, I replied simply. I'll start my trip next week. If you want to say goodbye, you know where to find me. I turned off my phone before he could answer. The storm that had threatened all morning finally began. Big drops falling on the garden that soon wouldn't be mine. I didn't bother to go inside. I let the rain soak me, washing away tears I hadn't even noticed were falling. This was Eleanor Thompson saying goodbye to the woman she had been for nearly 70 years. Eleanor, the devoted wife. Eleanor, the mother who was never enough. Eleanor, the keeper of secrets. From that moment on, I would be just Eleanor, and the world wasn't ready to meet her. The trailer was smaller than it looked in the pictures. 17 feet long, a mini kitchen, a bathroom the size of a broom closet, and a bed that transformed into a dining table by day. For a woman who'd spent 4 decades in a 4-bedroom house with a yard, it was basically a shoebox, and I was in love with it. Are you sure you don't want me to come with you? At least until Maine? Sarah asked for the 3rd time. watching as I put the last few items away in the compact cabinets. "You've never driven anything this big before." "I took lessons, remember? 3 days of training." I smiled, adjusting the small vase of fresh daisies I insisted on putting in the window. "Besides, this beauty is practically the size of the SUV Diane drives to soccer practice." Sarah rolled her eyes at my dig at my daughter-in-law. "Some habits are hard to break." "Michael called last night," she said, seemingly casual, testing the mattress on the tiny bed. I froze for a second, then continued organizing the few kitchen utensils I was bringing. "Really? And what did my beloved son want? To know if it's true you sold the house in 3 days, for 20% below market value." I shrugged. "Mr. Collins did a great job. A young couple, first baby on the way. They fell in love with the house the moment they saw the swing in the oak tree. Michael is furious. He says you're throwing away the family's inheritance. As far as I know, my name was the only one on the deed since Harold passed." I shut the last cabinet a little harder than necessary. Funny how he's so concerned about the family inheritance now that he's excluded me from that same family. Sarah sighed, standing up and putting her hands on my shoulders. "He doesn't know about the cancer, Mom. If he did, what? He'd stay with me out of pity? Tolerate me out of some sense of filial duty?" I shook my head. "No, thank you. I'd rather have the honesty of rejection than the hypocrisy of forced compassion." "That's your pride talking." "Maybe, but it's all I have left now." Sarah hugged me, long and hard, as if she could keep me there by sheer willpower. "Call every day," she murmured into my hair. "And if you feel anything, pain, shortness of breath, dizziness, go straight to a hospital. Promise?" "I promise," I answered, knowing full well I was probably lying. I didn't want to spend my last days in ER waiting rooms. At 9:30 on that sunny Wednesday morning, I set off from Boston, heading north for Portland, Maine. Traffic was light, and my little trailer, which I'd named Liberty in a fit of romance, handled well on the highway. A playlist Sarah had made for me played softly on the radio. Nina Simone, Aretha Franklin, Etta James, the soundtrack of my youth. Somewhere after Portsmouth, New Hampshire, I stopped at a roadside diner for coffee. I sat at the counter between truckers and travelers and ordered a slice of lemon pie and black coffee. "Traveling alone, honey?" asked the waitress, a woman around 50 with a name tag that read Dottie. "Yes," I replied, feeling a strange satisfaction in saying it. "I'm taking a road trip up the coast. Your husband didn't want to come?" "I'm a widow," I replied. Then, suddenly feeling a need to explain more, I added, "Actually, I'm starting a new life. Sold my house, bought a trailer, and I'm seeing where the road takes me." Dottie smiled, a smile that said she'd seen it all from behind that counter. "Good for you, honey. Never too late for an adventure." She winked. "Believe me, I've seen everything here. Just last week, an 82-year-old lady sat right where you are, heading to Vegas to marry a man she met online. Said her kids were having fits, but she didn't have time to waste. We laughed together, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd ever have the courage for something like that. Not marriage, of course. One marriage was enough for a lifetime. But the boldness, the guts to truly not care what others thought. Maybe, with the limited time I had left, I could learn. Back on the road, with the horizon opening up ahead of me, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 1 week. From the respectable lady, retired English literature professor, Jane Austen specialist, to a nomad with a trailer and no fixed address. What would my old colleagues at the university say? What would my students, who saw me as the epitome of academic tradition, think? Eleanor Thompson, the woman who once scolded a student for wearing ripped jeans to class, now driving up the interstate listening to blues with no set destination. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Michael. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the answer button. Finally, I pressed, accept. "Hello, Michael," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Mom?" he answered, his voice tense. "Sarah says you're driving a trailer up the coast. Is that true, or is she exaggerating?" "It's absolutely true. I'm on my way to Portland right now." Silence on the other end. Then, "Have you lost your mind? At 67, you decide to sell the family home for practically nothing and head out like some sort of aging hippie. It's interesting how the house is suddenly the family home when it's about the money, but it's just my house when it comes to responsibilities and upkeep." I kept my tone deliberately light, almost amused. "And yes, maybe I have lost my mind, Or maybe I've finally found it. Is this because of what happened on the 4th of July? Is this some kind of emotional blackmail? Because if it is, not everything revolves around you, Michael, I interrupted, surprised by my own boldness. Believe it or not, this decision has nothing to do with you. It's about me, about what I want. What do you want? His voice was incredulous. Since when do you know what you want? You spent your whole life doing what Dad wanted, being who he wanted you to be. And now, 5 years after he's gone, you're suddenly the queen of freedom? His words hit like a punch, not for their cruelty, but for their accuracy. Michael always knew how to find the weak spot and press hard. You're right, I replied softly, surprising him. I spent decades being who everyone else wanted me to be. The perfect wife to Harold, the perfect mother to you and Sarah, the perfect teacher for my students. And you know what? I'm tired. I'm so incredibly tired of being everyone's Eleanor, but my own. Another silence, this one longer. There's something you're not telling me, he finally said, his voice less harsh. Sarah's acting weird. You're acting different. There are a lot of things I haven't told you over the years, Michael. Some you might never know. Others, I paused, thinking of the blue envelope with Leonard. Others, maybe one day. That's cryptic, even for you, Mom. I laughed, a genuine laugh. Maybe I'm discovering my mysterious side. They say older women become invisible in society. I'm using that to reinvent myself. I don't like this, he muttered, almost to himself. I really don't like this. You don't have to like it, dear. I'm not asking for permission. A sign announced the Portland exit in 2 miles. I was almost at my first destination. I have to go, Michael. I'm getting to Portland. Mom, he said quickly before I could hang up. Be careful, okay? And let me know when you get there, so I know you're safe. A small gesture, almost insignificant to most people. But from Michael, the same Michael who had slammed the door in my face just a week before, it was practically a peace offering. I will, I promised, and hung up. The campground in Portland was simple, but clean and well kept. I parked my trailer in a spot overlooking a small pond and went to check in at the office. First time traveling alone? Asked the manager, a middle-aged man with a graying red beard. Is it that obvious? I asked, handing him my documents. Let's just say you don't have that world-weary look of seasoned travelers, he smiled. But everyone starts somewhere. How long are you staying? A few days, maybe a week? I'm not sure yet. Great. Feel free to extend your stay if you want. We have a community campfire every night, if you'd like to join the other campers. Fridays are music nights. One of our regulars brings his guitar. I thanked him and returned to my trailer, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had done it. I had really left everything behind. I was doing something completely unthinkable for the old Eleanor. I made a simple sandwich for dinner and ate it sitting on the trailer steps, watching the sun set over the pond. Around the campground, lights began to twinkle on, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifted through the evening air. Families on vacation, retired couples, young backpackers, and me, a literature professor with terminal cancer, escaping a life of expectations to finally live as I wanted, for whatever time I had left. I picked up my phone and texted Michael. Got here safely. The place is beautiful. The pond reminds me of that time we went fishing in Vermont, when you were 9 and insisted you saw a giant squid in the water. He replied just a few minutes later. It was an old bed sheet. You got so scared you tipped the boat over. I smiled at the screen. A moment of truce, a memory shared without bitterness. I replied, Your father was furious because he lost his new fishing rod, but then he laughed so hard he couldn't breathe when he tried to explain it to the cabin owner. 3 dots blinked, showing he was typing, then stopped, started again, stopped once more. Finally, good night, Mom. Take care. It wasn't much. It wasn't an apology or an offer to reconcile, but it was something. A fragile thread still connecting us, despite everything. I put the phone away and breathed in the night air. My first day on the road was over. The first of many, I hoped, though I knew that many now meant something different to me. 6 to 8 months. 24 to 32 weeks. Not much time, but enough to do what needed to be done. To live, truly live, for the first time. To say goodbye. And maybe, finally, to reveal the truth I'd carried for more than 40 years. On the other side of the campground, someone started playing guitar. The music drifted through the night, reaching me like an invitation. I'd lived my whole life inside the lines. Now, in the twilight of my days, it was time to step beyond them. I stood up, smoothed my now short hair, another recent act of rebellion. I'd cut off the long gray locks Harold loved so much and walked toward the music. It was time for Eleanor Thompson to meet the world, and for the world to meet Eleanor. "Have you tried with butter?" I looked up from my clumsy battle with the whole lobster taking up most of my plate. A sun-bronzed, gray-haired man watched me from the next table, a warm and amused smile on his face. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, feeling my cheeks flush. He laughed, a pleasant, deep, genuine laugh. "Only to a trained eye. I was born and raised in Maine. I can spot a lobster rookie a mile away." We were at Portland Lobster Company, a seaside restaurant recommended by the campground manager. After 3 days exploring the city, walking for hours on rocky beaches and visiting historic lighthouses, I decided to treat myself to a classic local dinner. What I hadn't anticipated was the spectacle of my ineptitude with an entire crustacean. "Actually," I confessed, "this is the first time I've eaten a lobster that didn't come already cleaned and prepped in a fancy Boston restaurant." He stood, picking up his plate and craft beer. "Mind if I join you? I promise a free lesson in eating lobster like a true Mainer." At any other moment in my life, I would have politely refused. Eleanor Thompson did not dine with strangers, especially male strangers. But the new Eleanor, the Eleanor with an expiration date, just smiled and gestured to the empty seat in front of me. "Please, save me from this public humiliation." He settled in with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Jack Peterson," he introduced himself, extending a large, calloused hand. "Eleanor Thompson," I replied, shaking his hand. "So, Eleanor Thompson, first lesson. Forget all that paraphernalia." He pointed at the little forks and crackers I was fumbling with. "Use your hands. It's messy, it's chaotic, it's how it's meant to be." For the next hour, Jack taught me the anatomy of a lobster, which parts to eat, which to avoid, and the best way to extract the precious meat without looking like I was performing delicate surgery. Between sips of local craft beer, another first for me, and stories about life in Portland, I learned he was a widower of 6 years, a former Coast Guard sailor, now retired and working part-time as a fishing guide for tourists. "So what brings a sophisticated Boston professor to our humble shores?" he asked when we reached dessert, a blueberry pie so good it nearly brought me to tears. I hesitated. What could I say? "I'm dying and trying to live before it's too late" didn't seem right for a light dinner by the sea. "I'm on a journey of self-discovery," I finally answered. "Sold the family house, bought a trailer, following the coast, everything a respectable 67-year-old woman shouldn't do." His blue eyes, crinkled at the corners, sparkled with approval. "Ah, a late-blooming rebel, my favorite kind of person." "It's such a cliché," I admitted, laughing at myself. "The middle-aged widow searching for meaning. Next thing you know, I'll be meditating at a spiritual retreat or making a vision board with motivational quotes." Jack laughed heartily, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Nothing's a cliché when you're actually living it, Eleanor. And believe me, I know the difference between someone following a script and someone truly searching for something." "And what's the difference?" I asked, genuinely curious. "The eyes," he replied without hesitation. "Yours have that perfect mix of fear and determination, like someone learning to swim in deep water, scared, but refusing to go back to shore." His observation caught me off guard. That was exactly how I felt. "You're more perceptive than you look, Mr. Peterson." "Jack," he corrected, "and you haven't told me how long you're staying in Portland." "A few more days, maybe. I don't have a set itinerary." He smiled again, paying the check despite my protests. "Good, because tomorrow's a perfect day for sailing, and my boat needs the exercise. What do you say? Want to see the Maine coast the right way? By sea?" Old Eleanor would have politely declined. She would have invented commitments, expressed concern about going out with a man she barely knew, reminding herself that respectable ladies don't get on boats with strangers. But new Eleanor, the Eleanor counting her days instead of wasting them, just smiled and said, "What time should I be at the dock?" Jack's boat, ironically named Second Chance, was a 32-foot sailboat, immaculately kept. I arrived at the dock at 9 a.m. the next morning, as agreed, dressed in the most seaworthy clothes I could improvise: jeans, a navy sweater, and a cap I'd bought at the Lighthouse souvenir shop. "You look like a real sailor," Jack teased, reaching out to help me aboard. Clearly, I replied dryly. Nothing says sea expert like a cap that says I heart's Maine in glitter. We spent the day sailing Casco Bay, with Jack pointing out islands, telling stories of shipwrecks, and sharing local legends. I learned the difference between port and starboard, helped, awkwardly with the sails, and felt the unique freedom of being at sea, far from everything and everyone. When we anchored in a small, sheltered cove for lunch, Jack made simple sandwiches and opened a bottle of white wine. To the sea, to freedom, and to new friendships, he toasted, clinking his glass with mine. Sitting on the bow, with the late afternoon sun painting the sky orange and pink, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, decades maybe. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, watching the gulls circling the boat. "Go ahead. You don't seem resentful about losing your wife. How do you do it?" Jack looked out over the water, thoughtful. "Catherine and I had 38 years together. Good years, most of them. When cancer came, it was fast. 4 months from diagnosis to the end." He paused, sipping his wine. "The first 2 years after she died, I was furious. At God, at the doctors, at the world. Drank too much, isolated myself, pushed my kids away. What changed?" "A storm," he answered, smiling at a private memory. "I was on this very boat, drunk and feeling sorry for myself, when a sudden storm hit the bay. Almost lost second chance, almost lost myself with it. When I finally made it back to the harbor, soaked and sobered by fear, I realized Catherine would have slapped me upside the head if she'd seen me like that." He turned to me, his clear eyes reflecting the sunset. "I realized I had a choice. Spend the rest of my life mourning what I lost, or honor what we had by fully living whatever time I had left. I chose the second." I felt tears rising, unexpected and unwelcome. Jack, with the kindness of a man used to respecting boundaries, pretended not to notice, busying himself pouring more wine. "Do you have kids?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "2. Jennifer lives here in Portland with her husband and my 3 grandkids. Mark's in Seattle, works in tech, so complicated I don't even try to understand anymore." He smiled with paternal pride. "And you?" "2 as well. Sarah, the sensible one, a college professor like I was. And Michael." I hesitated. "Michael's a chef, owns his own restaurant in Boston. We're complicated right now." "Ah, the famous complicated," Jack said. "In my day, we just called it a big fight." I laughed, appreciating his honesty. "It was more than a fight. He told me I'm not family anymore." Literally slammed the door in my face. Jack whistled low. Must have been something serious. "Honestly, it was over nothing," I said, surprised by the bitterness in my voice, or rather, the buildup of decades of little disappointments, unmet expectations, words taken the wrong way. The last straw was me showing up unannounced on the 4th of July and asking about my grandson's grades. Jack murmured, unconvinced. "There's usually more behind closed doors." I thought of the blue envelope kept with Leonard, the secret I'd carried for decades, the truth that could destroy the image Michael had of his father, of himself. "Maybe," was all I said. Jack, with the tact of someone who recognizes dangerous ground, changed the subject, telling stories from his Coast Guard days. When the sun finally set, we sailed back to the harbor under a starry sky, with the crescent moon lighting our way. On the dock, I hesitated. Old Eleanor would have thanked him for the wonderful day, and left. New Eleanor wanted more time, more conversation, more life. "You know what I've never done?" I said casually as we disembarked. "What's that?" "Walked on the beach by moonlight. Seems like the kind of thing a woman on a journey of self-discovery should do, don't you think?" Jack smiled, that same warm smile that had won me over lobster the night before. "I know just the beach for that, and it's only 10 minutes from here." The beach was just as he'd promised, deserted, with soft sand and the hypnotic sound of gentle waves. We walked barefoot, talking about books. He was an avid reader of historical nonfiction. Music, we shared a love for classic jazz, and places we dreamed of visiting. He'd never been to Europe. I'd never seen the Grand Canyon. When we stopped to watch the moon reflected on the ocean, Jack lightly touched my hand, a questioning gesture. I looked at him, for his honest face, kind eyes, the posture of a man who'd lived a life of hard work and integrity. And I made another decision the old Eleanor would never have considered. I laced my fingers through his. "Can I be very direct, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice softer than before. Please, there's something about you. Something that says you're carrying more than just a distant son and a midlife crisis. I felt my heart race. Was it that obvious? What makes you think that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The urgency, the way you watch everything, like you want to memorize every detail, like you're saying goodbye, not just discovering. I stepped away, letting go of his hand, hugging myself. The sea breeze suddenly felt colder. Am I that transparent? Only to someone who's been on the other side, he answered gently. Catherine had the same look in her eyes in her last months. The tears I'd held back for weeks finally spilled over. No judgment, no questions. Jack just held me, letting me cry into his chest that smelled of sea and wood. When I could finally speak, the words came out broken. 6 to 8 months. Metastatic cancer. My son doesn't even know yet. Nobody does, except my daughter and my lawyer. And now me, he finished softly, brushing a lock of hair from my face. And now you, a stranger I met 2 days ago. Sometimes it's easier to share secrets with strangers. Less complicated. We stood in silence for a few minutes, just the sound of the waves between us. What are you really looking for, Eleanor? On this trip? This journey? The question I'd been avoiding. What did I want? Redemption? Forgiveness? Adventure? Escape? I want to live authentically. At least once, I finally answered. I want to be completely myself. No fear, no apologies. I want to fix what can be fixed and make peace with what can't. And I hesitated. I want to decide how to finish my story. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of what I wasn't saying out loud. It's a brave search, he said. And if I may say so, one that deserves company, at least for part of the way. I looked at him surprised. What are you suggesting? I have a boat. You have a trailer. The coast is long. Maybe we could explore some of it together. No commitments, no expectations. Just 2 travelers sharing the road for a while. In another life, another time, I'd have thought the proposal scandalous, reckless, maybe even dangerous. A respectable lady doesn't just run off with a man she barely knows. But a terminal illness has a way of clarifying priorities. How much time do you have? I asked. All the time in the world, he answered with a smile. At least until fall, when I promised my daughter I'd help with her new house. I can't promise I'll make it to fall, I said, the reality of my condition hanging between us. I'm not asking for promises, Eleanor, just company. For as long as we have. The moon shone above, silent witness to another moment of transformation in Eleanor Thompson's life, from professor to widow, from mother to stranger, from dying woman to, what? A woman still able to feel, to risk, to live. I have one condition, I said, surprising us both with a mischievous smile. Name it. I want to see a whale before I die. A real whale, in the ocean, not in an aquarium. Jack threw his head back and laughed, a sound that seemed to belong to the night, the sea, to life itself. Eleanor Thompson, I may not be able to fix your relationship with your son, or give you more days, but I promise this. Before summer's over, you'll see whales. Not just one, dozens of them. Under the Portland moon, with the sea as our witness, we sealed our unlikely pact with a kiss, the first I'd given a man since Harold died. And it was different from anything I'd ever felt before, because for the first time in my life, I was kissing someone not as the Eleanor I was supposed to be, but as the Eleanor I really was. Free, imperfect, real, and still alive, gloriously alive. Cape Elizabeth, Maine, has one of the most beautiful lighthouses on the East Coast. Portland Head Light, built in 1791, stands tall above the rugged rocks, bravely facing the Atlantic Ocean for over 2 centuries. It was there, sitting on a time-worn wooden bench weathered by salt and wind, that I began to write the letters. Jack had left to take care of some things in Portland before our joint journey down the coast. We were planning to head south in the coming days, me in my trailer, him sometimes by boat, meeting in pre-arranged ports. An improvised adventure with no strings or expectations, exactly what I needed. I took from my pocket a small leather notebook I'd bought at a charming stationery shop in downtown Portland. Its dark brown cover featured a discreet embossed lighthouse, seemed fitting for my intentions. Inside, I kept envelopes and quality stationery, the kind you hardly find anymore in the digital age. The first letter would be for Sarah, the easiest, or perhaps the hardest, because it would be the most honest. Dear Sarah, If you're reading this, it's because I'm already gone. Leonard must have given you this package, just as we arranged. First of all, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't let you be with me until the end. Maybe it was selfish, but I needed this journey alone. Well, not so alone as I told you about Jack over the phone. I needed to rediscover who I am, away from the roles I played all my life. There's so much I want to tell you, daughter. So many truths I kept, some to protect, others out of cowardice. The first truth, you were always my anchor. While Michael was the storm that constantly challenged me, you were the safe harbor that kept me centered. Maybe that's why I was harder on him and softer on you. It wasn't fair to either of you. The second truth, and maybe the most important, your father loved you both deeply, but there was a burden in his relationship with Michael that you never fully understood. It wasn't coldness, as you sometimes suggested. It was guilt. Harold knew, Sarah. He always knew. I stopped writing, watching a seagull land nearby on the bench. How to explain? How to put into words something I never fully understood myself? I took a deep breath and continued. The night I found out I was pregnant with Michael, I cried myself to sleep, not from joy, but from panic. Harold and I had been engaged for only a month, and 3 weeks earlier, I'd made what I then considered the worst mistake of my life. One night with Robert, my first love, who had briefly returned to Boston. When I told Harold about the pregnancy, I saw something in his eyes, a silent calculation, an unspoken doubt. He never asked, I never confessed. We married 2 months later, and Michael was born prematurely, 7 months after the ceremony. But your father was a smart man, Sarah. And as Michael grew, certain features became impossible to ignore. The shape of his eyes, the dimple in his chin, the quick temper that neither Harold nor I had. One night, when Michael was about 8, Harold came home late from a medical conference. I was already in bed, pretending to sleep. He sat on the edge of the mattress and said in the dark, "It doesn't matter where he came from, Ellie. He's my son, the only son I'll ever have." I pretended not to hear, and we never spoke of it again. Years later, I found out why. Harold had mumps as a teenager, which left him sterile. He knew from the start that Michael couldn't be his biological child, and even so, he chose to love us, chose to raise Michael as his own. Tears blurred my vision, lightly smudging the ink on the page. I wiped them away and continued. This is the truth Michael never knew, that his father loved him not out of obligation, not by mistake, but by conscious, deliberate, daily choice. And this is the truth that broke my heart when on July 4th, he accused me of doing something terrible to Harold. What Michael overheard, a few days before his father's death, was only part of the story. Harold, delirious from medication, murmured something about forgiving Ellie and the boy. Michael took it as some betrayal on my part that had hurt his father. He never guessed it was Harold's act of forgiving himself for never having the courage to admit his infertility, for letting me carry the weight of that secret alone. Sarah, only you can decide if Michael should know the whole truth. I've included a letter for him too, but it's up to you to judge if he's ready to receive it. As for you, my sensible daughter, my peacemaker, my heart, I want you to know that I was happy. Despite the secrets, despite the omissions, despite the small and large flaws we all have, I had a full life. And these last months on the road, rediscovering myself, were a gift I never thought I deserved. I love you more than words can say, Mom. I placed the letter in the envelope, sealed it, and wrote Sarah's name in my best handwriting. One letter done, many still to write. My phone buzzed with a message from Jack. I'm coming back. Dinner in the trailer or at the restaurant? I smiled at the screen, quickly replying, Trailer. I have wine and stories to share. As I put away my phone, I noticed 3 missed calls from Michael. No voicemails. Typical, wanting to communicate, but only on his terms, in his own time. I decided the next letter would be for him. The hardest, no doubt. How do you explain 4 decades of secrets? How do you ask forgiveness for a lie that big? Before I could begin, my phone rang again. Michael. Hello, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Finally, he replied, sounding irritated. Where are you? I've tried to reach you all day. I'm in Cape Elizabeth watching the lighthouse. It's stunning, you know? Built by order of George Washington. Mom, I don't care about lighthouse history right now. We need to talk about the house. Of course. The house. Always back to that. The house has already been sold, Michael. That's done. It's not that simple. His voice was tight, controlled. I found some things in the attic at Sarah's house, things you left with her. My heart raced. What things? Letters. From Dad to you, from when you were engaged, and, he hesitated, some from a Robert Callahan. The world seemed to freeze around me. The letters, the damned letters I thought I'd destroyed decades ago. Apparently some survived, hidden in an old box Sarah had saved during the move. Michael. Who is he, Mom? This Robert? The letters are from just months before you married Dad. He writes like you had some sort of history. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 42 years of secrets on the brink of collapse. We did, I finally answered. Robert was my first love, before your father. He mentions a meeting in Boston, weeks before you married Dad. Every word from Michael was a sharp needle bursting the balloon of lies I'd inflated for decades. It was just one night, I replied, surprised at my own honesty. A goodbye, silence on the other end. Then, how many weeks before the wedding exactly? There it was, the question I'd always feared, the merciless math that could no longer be ignored. Michael, this isn't a conversation to have over the phone. How many weeks, Mom? His voice trembled now, between anger and something more vulnerable. 3 weeks before the wedding, I said, almost whispering. Please, Michael, we need to talk about this in person. And I was born how long after the wedding? 7 months, I answered automatically. But it was a premature birth. Yeah, I've heard that story my whole life. His laugh was bitter, cutting. Except I found my original birth certificate in the same box. Not the copy you always showed me. The original. My blood ran cold. The certificate I thought I'd destroyed decades ago. The irrefutable proof. Michael, please, how much did Dad know? Was he an idiot, or did he just pretend not to notice you got pregnant by another man? The anger in his voice was palpable, but also the pain, a deep, old pain finally finding its voice. Your father knew everything, I replied, tears now streaming freely. He always knew, and he chose to love you anyway. He chose to be your father in every way that really matters. So I was right on July 4th. You really did something terrible to him. No, Michael, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand why there always seemed to be a distance between me and him. Why he could never really connect with me like he did with Sarah. Why you were always overprotective and controlling with me. Guilt, maybe. It wasn't like that, I tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate, insufficient. Who's my biological father, Mom? Is this Robert still alive? Do I have siblings I don't know about? Maybe grandparents who never knew I existed? Robert died 15 years ago, I answered mechanically. Cancer. He never knew about you. No one knew except Harold. And now you. Another silence, even heavier. I need time to process this, he finally said, his voice strangely calm. Maybe it's good you're far away now. Michael, please, can we meet? Talk in person. There's so much you don't— Not now, he interrupted. Maybe never. I don't know. The click of the call ending sounded like a gunshot in the evening quiet. I sat frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, as if I could somehow re-establish the connection, go back in time, fix what now seemed irreparably broken. The truth I'd guarded for so long was now out in the world, raw and without the nuances only I could explain. Michael's version of betrayal, deceit, lies was just one side of a far more complicated story. A story of youth and passion, of mistakes and forgiveness, of a man who chose to love a child who wasn't his, and of a woman who lived decades divided between gratitude and guilt. Eleanor? I looked up to see Jack walking toward me, 2 glasses and a bottle of wine in his hands. His smile faded when he saw my face.